It looked like an ordinary day at the zoo, with families laughing, children pointing, and cameras flashing against the thick glass walls. But behind that glass a massive gorilla sat silently, his dark eyes carrying a weight few could ever understand. To the visitors he was just another exhibit, a moment of entertainment. Yet for him this cage was not a display, it was his world, and inside it lived the only thing that still gave his life meaning, his mate and their fragile baby. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to live your entire life in a few square meters of concrete? Or what it means to raise a family while strangers press their faces to the glass, banging and laughing at your every move? For this gorilla, the answer was a cruel routine of captivity, mixed with fleeting moments of tenderness. His life was not a spectacle. It was survival, painted with rare strokes of love and hope. Every morning began the same way, the sound of metal gates clanging open, the zookeeper stepping in with buckets of food, and the distant roar of children's voices flooding the air. The gorilla had grown used to this pattern, but that did not make it easier. He would glance at his mate, watching her carefully feed their young one, while he shielded them from the loud chaos that pressed against the glass. Despite the suffocating noise, there were moments of quiet. In those brief silences, the gorilla's hand would brush against his mate's, and the baby would climb onto his chest, curling into his fur. These were the moments he cherished, the ones that reminded him he was more than just an exhibit. He was a father. He was a protector. He was still alive, even in a world that had stolen his freedom. Visitors never saw that side of him. They saw the giant body, the broad shoulders, the heavy fists resting on the cold floor. They laughed when he moved too slowly, cheered when he banged on the glass, and shouted to make him react. For them, it was entertainment. For him, it was humiliation. Every shout was a reminder that he was trapped, his life reduced to a show he never asked to perform. The baby gorilla, still too young to understand the cruelty of captivity, found joy in the smallest things, a feather floating down from a bird above, a patch of sunlight that slipped through the bars, the warmth of his mother's arms. The father watched closely, knowing that these small joys were fragile. He feared the day when his child would realize that the outside world, the one just beyond the glass, was forever out of reach. Sometimes at night, when the zoo grew silent, the gorilla would press his face to the corner of the enclosure where the shadows fell. He would look at the stars, tiny specks in a vast sky, and wonder if his family would ever see them without barriers. He longed for freedom, not for himself alone, but for the two lives beside him, the ones who still gave him a reason to endure. And yet, even in this confined world, love persisted. Every embrace with his mate, every gentle moment with his child, was an act of defiance against the concrete walls that surrounded them. Their bond was unbreakable, a fragile flame burning in the coldest of places. He knew deep down that as long as they were together, hope was still alive, even in captivity. The day began like any other, with the metallic clatter of gates and the shuffle of keepers entering the enclosure. But this time something felt different. The gorilla watched closely as the men moved with unusual purpose, carrying ropes and crates. His mate tightened her hold on their child, sensing the tension in the air. Something was about to happen, and none of them were prepared. The keepers advanced toward the mother and the baby, their voices sharp and hurried. The gorilla rose to his full height, pounding the ground with his fists, warning them to stay away. But the bars and glass that confined him made his rage useless. The humans did not flinch. They cornered his family with practiced ease, as if their fear and resistance were nothing more than obstacles to be managed. The mother clutched her baby desperately, pressing the infant to her chest as the men closed in. The gorilla bellowed, his cries deep and trembling, but his voice carried no power here. A dart gun was raised, and in seconds the mother's body weakened, her grip loosening. The baby screamed, tiny arms reaching out until rough hands pulled them away. The gorilla hurled himself against the glass, his massive body shaking the walls of the enclosure. His fists slammed again and again, but the barrier did not give. Visitors nearby froze, their laughter replaced by uneasy silence. Some raised their phones to capture the scene, but even through a screen, the sound of his anguish made their hands tremble. Children clung to their parents, asking why the gorilla was crying. No one had answers that could soften the truth. Behind the glass stood a father watching his family taken from him, powerless to protect them. His roars filled the air, but the keepers carried on, unaffected, dragging the mother and child away until they disappeared from sight. He pressed his face to the glass, his breath fogging the cold surface, searching for even a glimpse of them. But the hallway was empty now, the sound of footsteps fading into the distance. The silence that followed was heavier than the loudest roar. For the first time in years, the cage felt smaller, tighter, as if it were swallowing him whole. Visitors shuffled away, disturbed by what they had seen. Some whispered that it didn't feel right, others insisted it was just part of zoo management. But none could forget the look in the gorilla's eyes, a mixture of fury, desperation, and heartbreak that pierced through the barrier more sharply than any sound. Alone in the corner, the gorilla lowered himself to the ground, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. He reached out to the empty space where his mate and child once sat, his hand brushing against nothing but cold concrete. The bond that had kept him alive was ripped away, and all that remained was a hollow silence that no visitor could ever truly understand. The enclosure felt emptier than ever. The gorilla sat in the corner, his massive frame hunched over, refusing to eat the food left by the keepers. His eyes were fixed on the spot where his mate and baby had been taken, following the invisible trail of their absence. Every sound from the visitors outside seemed distant, almost meaningless compared to the loss he felt. Hours passed without movement. His chest rose and fell slowly, his hands resting on the cold concrete, as if trying to anchor himself to the memories of his family. The zoo, once alive with noise, now felt hollow, and the gorilla's silence carried a weight that no human voice could penetrate. He seemed trapped not only by bars but by grief itself. Then his gaze fell on a small, tattered piece of cloth lying near the corner. Slowly he picked it up, examining it with careful hands. In an instinctive act of longing, he wrapped it around his arms as if cradling his lost baby, holding it close to his chest with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with his enormous strength. For several minutes he rocked back and forth, his head pressing gently against the fabric. The motion was soft and almost human, a tender echo of the care he had once given to his child. Visitors who stopped to watch the scene were silent, captivated by the raw vulnerability of an animal so often misunderstood. A visitor with a phone discreetly filmed the moment, capturing the gorilla's gesture with quiet reverence. The video quickly spread online, moving people in ways a simple zoo visit never could. Millions of viewers across the world paused their day to witness a father's grief, transmitted through the simplest yet most profound act of love. Comments poured in, ranging from disbelief to tears. People couldn't ignore the pain in his eyes or the careful way he held the cloth. Some argued that the video should be seen by everyone involved in the zoo, hoping it would spark change. Others simply shared it as a reminder of what captivity can do to creatures capable of deep emotion. Even as the gorilla rocked the cloth, he occasionally glanced toward the far end of the enclosure, as if searching for any sign of his family's return. His posture remained protective, every movement filled with longing and memory. The emptiness around him was palpable, but the connection to his lost family lingered in each gentle sway. As the sun began to dip behind the trees outside, casting long shadows across the concrete floor, the gorilla finally rested his head on the fabric. His eyes closed briefly, a faint exhale escaping him. Though his family was gone, the gesture spoke louder than any roar, a testament to enduring love, a silent plea that his pain and theirs should not be forgotten. The video spread faster than anyone could imagine. Within days, millions had seen the gorilla rocking the cloth, an image of heartbreak that no one could ignore. Social media lit up with comments, shares, and hashtags demanding answers. People from around the world were shaken by the silent grief of a father separated from his family. Viewers began questioning the zoo's practices, posting threads about animal welfare and the ethics of captivity. Articles circulated that described the enclosure as too small and the conditions as neglectful. Every post, every share seemed to add weight to the growing outrage, creating a tide of voices united by a single truth. This was not just entertainment. Animal rights organizations joined the conversation, sending letters and petitions to the zoo's management. They highlighted the emotional trauma caused by separating a family and called for immediate action to protect the gorilla. The case became a rallying point, a symbol of how captivity can strip away not just freedom, but dignity. Local news stations picked up the story. Clips of the gorilla rocking the cloth appeared on evening broadcasts, commentators speaking with barely contained emotion. Journalists interviewed experts who explained that such behavior was a clear sign of grief and attachment, traits often overlooked in discussions about animal intelligence. The public's reaction was relentless. Emails flooded the zoo, demanding answers, protesting the treatment, and calling for reforms. Children who had once laughed at the gorilla's movements now drew pictures of him with messages of hope, while adults signed petitions that stretched across continents. Every gesture reinforced the message that the world was watching. Even the zoo staff could not ignore the intensity of the response. Meetings were called, discussions held behind closed doors. The pressure to act mounted as media coverage continued and social networks amplified the story, making it clear that inaction was no longer an option. The gorilla's silent plea had become impossible to dismiss. Experts suggested relocation to a sanctuary where the gorilla could live in a larger, enriched environment with others of his kind. Advocates emphasized the need to reunite him with a safe community, even if his original family could not return. The story transformed from one of heartbreak into a catalyst for change, showing the power of public awareness. As petitions circulated and news outlets continued reporting, hope began to grow. For the first time since his family had been taken, there was a possibility that the gorilla would leave the concrete cage behind. His grief had moved millions, and the world was starting to act, not just as spectators, but as protectors demanding justice. After weeks of relentless pressure, the zoo finally announced a decision that many had fought for. The gorilla would be transferred to a rescued animal sanctuary. The announcement spread across the news and social media, bringing relief and joy to thousands who had followed his story. For the first time, hope seemed real. The sanctuary was a vast space filled with trees, natural vegetation, and climbing structures. No more concrete floors or bars confined him. The gorilla explored cautiously at first, sniffing the air and touching the soil beneath his massive hands. For the first time in years, he felt the world beyond the cage. Though his original family could not be reunited with him, other gorillas greeted him with curiosity and gentle acceptance. Slowly he joined them, observing, learning, and finally interacting. The bonds of this new group became a source of comfort, a reminder that connection and belonging were still possible. Every movement in the sanctuary reminded him of freedom. Running across open fields, swinging from sturdy branches, and basking in sunlight without restriction. Even moments of solitude were different here, calm, peaceful, and safe. The life he had longed for was no longer a distant dream. Visitors who came to see the sanctuary witnessed a transformed gorilla, one who carried memories of grief, but also strength and resilience. His story inspired documentaries, articles, and campaigns, showing the world that compassion and advocacy could produce real change. Advocates emphasized that the fight was not just for him, but for all animals kept in conditions that ignored their emotional and social needs. The gorilla's journey became a symbol of how public voices, when united, can demand better treatment and respect for animals everywhere. Though the pain of losing his mate and child remained, it was tempered by the richness of his new life. Surrounded by others of his kind, with space to explore and autonomy to live naturally, he had reclaimed a part of himself that had been locked away for too long. In the end, his story left a lasting lesson. Animals are not here for human entertainment. They deserve respect, freedom, and dignity. The gorilla's resilience and the collective action of people who refused to ignore his suffering proved that even in the face of injustice, hope and justice can prevail.